Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 75, Crucible of Truth. We'll start off with some Star Trek news.
And then we'll get into our audience feedback section right after our main topic, continuing our exploration of Star Trek The Next Generation during its 35th anniversary year. We'll be discussing Season 2, Episode 9, The Measure of a Man. It's going to be a great conversation. Stay with us. Well, here we are yet again, Mike. We have not had a thematic episode of this type on this show in at least a month.
That's right. Where we're back at our thematic episodes, our separated saucer section, as David, our co-host, would say. And it's our 75th episode. It's our diamond anniversary.
Well, it's our diamond episode-versary, or something.
That's the traditional gift. Apparently, the modern gift is gold, but I don't know. Diamond anniversary has a more
50th.
Let's go with
gold.
the classics.
Yeah. Please. Well,
and we've got a real gem of an episode to discuss.
Oh, he's in rare form today, everybody.
Oh well.
Oh, that's great. Well, I am looking forward to that, and in honor of our 75th episode, we're going to be getting back into some of our classic structure, wherein we begin with Star Trek news, and I believe you have brought some to share with us.
I do, and it's just a few days away as we record this. April 5th is the release date for the newly remastered director's edition of Star Trek The Motion Picture.
Woo-hoo!
And Paramount dropped a trailer for it the other day. It'll be on Paramount Plus at first before coming to physical media. And I've watched the trailer and it looks gorgeous. And reading interviews with the people behind this production, it's not just cleaning up the director's edition. They really have remastered the director's edition to, they feel like, finally finish the project to make the movie future-proof, as they say. And they say they're doing this in line with notes that Robert Wise had left, but that they couldn't even do for the director's edition. Because that came out right at the advent of the DVD era. And apparently there were some things even then they still couldn't quite do. So there's some new shots and some revised effect shots. And I'm just really excited to see it. I've never been a detractor of the motion picture the way some are. I've always enjoyed it. And I can't wait to see what I assume will be the definitive edition of this film very shortly.
I'm looking forward to it myself. I was so impressed with what was done for the director's edition DVD.
Yeah.
It really made the film feel complete to me at the time. And, of course, Darren Doctorman and all the folks who are behind this have done expert work, even just in that edition.
Yeah.
Of creating something that, while it uses digital technology, makes things that could be accomplished optically at the time and makes them look like they would look if they had been accomplished optically at the time.
Exactly.
Really fulfilling Robert Wise's vision, not expanding on it, not changing it, but really completing the film. And that makes me really happy, because if you go back and watch like the theatrical cut, and of course there are some other cuts of the film, there's an extended cut and there was a television cut, which includes some terribly unfinished footage.
That one scene of Shatner clearly on a soundstage as he's floating off.
Yes, absolutely terrible. And so this has been, in essence, an unfinished film for the past 45 years, I guess.
Not
44 years.
Yeah.
And so
it's about time.
It's about time. It's about 43 years. 43 years, because 43, whatever. It's been in process.
I wasn't a math major, so I trust you.
It's been unfinished for a long time, and it's just great to see it finally coming together. I did have foisted upon me, against my will, a small teaser trailer for the
You
Because
couldn't divert your eyes in time.
you know me in trailers. No, I was watching with a friend of mine, and they were like, "Hey, I'm going to show you this trailer, and it's going to be okay. I know you don't like trailers, but it's going to be okay for this one, I promise." And I'm like, "Okay." They're
Uh-huh.
like, "Close your eyes." I said, "Okay." So I closed my eyes, and they said, "Open your eyes." And I looked, and the first shot I think was like the Enterprise nacelle, and I was like, "Oh, is this the director's edition of motion picture?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "I really don't want to see that." Like, "Oh, come on."
It's 43 years old.
I know,
But
but
not.
all
I
the
mean,
new
so I
stuff,
understand.
yeah,
I understand
all
where
the
you're
new
coming
stuff
from.
is new, and so there were some things that like, okay. I mean, it was just a little bit that I saw that I was like, well, that is definitely unique to the director's edition, and it's definitely different. They showed a
Yeah.
comparison, with the DVD version and this version on
Yeah,
one
they do.
shot,
They do.
and I was like, oh man. But I did see it, and I didn't die. But
Well, I respect your position on that. It's a little more hard line than I'd be, but I respect that.
well, I just enjoy surprises. I enjoy the first time. I enjoy,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that epic discovery.
Yes. Yes.
So there you
And
go.
speaking of Epic, apparently it will be released to theaters, at least a few theaters through Fathom Events. So
That's
I
right.
may have to. I've already got my tickets to go see Star Trek 2 in the fall on the big screen because I've never seen it on a big screen. But
Yep.
I've never seen the motion picture on a big screen either. And seeing this gloriously restored, completed edition would be the way to see it on a big
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
So,
I saw the theatrical cut on the big screen.
oh,
I
did
think
you?
I think for the
Nice.
40th anniversary they did a Fathom event. I think it was the
Okay.
40th
Okay.
or the 35th, one of the two, and so I saw that, and that was really good. But it was the theatrical cut, so it was lacking in all the ways that the theatrical cut is lacking. But I definitely want to go see this. It is, of course, dropping on First Contact Day on Paramount, which is great.
Yeah.
But then also, the Fathom event is going to be May 22nd, 23rd, and 25th. So
Oh, they've
it's
already
a
announced
Sunday.
it. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
the tickets
Thank you
go
for
on.
that.
Tickets go on sale April 8th. So
Okay. All
yeah,
right. Well, take my Quatloos Paramount.
absolutely.
I wish they hadn't insisted on putting Hayden Christensen on the bridge at the end of the movie as a Force Ghost. But, I guess nobody's ever completely happy.
Sometimes you just gotta flex with the times. You just gotta go with it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was the one shot in the trailer that I saw that I was like, no, hide my eyes. It's Hayden Christensen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I hope everybody enjoys it. And speaking of things for which we might want to lay down our hard-earned quatloos, coming in June will be some new Star Trek comics from IDW. And there are already some out there. There's this series called Adventures in the 32nd Century, and so it's Discovery Comics, and it'll be the fourth of those. There have been 3 previous in this series, and each one focuses on a specific character. And so far, we have had one issue on Kayla Detmer. We have had one issue on my friend Adira Tal. So I'm contractually obligated to at least read that one. And then we have one issue that will focus on Grudge. So there's that.
Grudge gets Grudge's own issue.
Grudge is getting her own issue.
She's a queen, eh?
She has a book, by the way, the Book of
I know
Grudge.
she does. Yeah.
So but the one that's coming in June is the 4th in the series. I'm so excited about this because it's focusing on Linus.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I'm looking forward to that. But what I'm also really looking forward to, and what I think you are definitely going to want to lay down some quatloos for, is Star Trek The Mirror War Sisko.
Oh.
Benjamin Sisko is
Wow.
tasked with taking out Intendant Kira Nerese's political rival. And there's some really good cover art that's been released.
Huh.
And so it's actually focusing on Cisco. Nerys will be in it.
Well,
Garrick will be
that's
in it, but I don't know much beyond that.
that could be really cool. I
Mm-hmm.
my daughter and I finished her introduction to and my rewatch of Deep Space Nine not that long ago, and
Mm.
I'd kind of forgotten how impressive and risky what they did with the mirror universe was, because they didn't just pick up where Mirror Mirror left off. They accounted for all those years of Federation history that would have gone by over in the mirror universe, and
Mm-hmm.
brought that whole concept into the Deep Space Nine setting in such a novel way. And it wasn't the obvious thing to do, but it was a very creative and engaging thing to do. And then they sustained it for, like, we went back to the mirror universe, what, at least once a season? It
Yeah,
seemed like in Deep Space
we
Nine.
went through. So there were several mirror episodes, and they really
Yeah.
teased out a storyline, story arc
Yeah.
between our universe and the mirror universe, and it really worked beautifully. I thought it was quite good. There's more mirror universe in Deep Space Nine than, well, I don't know. There might be at least as much, if not more, in Discovery.
I bet there's,
I don't know.
I
It
can't
might be
remember.
fairly even.
We were actually in the mirror universe for 2 episodes in season 3 of Discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And were we actually in it at all for season 1? I know that.
Yes.
Well, we were for at least one
Yes.
episode, right?
Yeah, for at least a couple
Yeah.
episodes, I think. So, and we have a lot of connections to the mirror universe in Discovery, which of course we won't spoil for our listeners who haven't been watching Discovery here. But Deep Space Nine and Discovery are at least equal in their ties, I would say, to the mirror universe in terms of screen time, probably. But I don't know; it might feel like more than it is in Deep Space Nine. We might go back and say that was only 3 episodes.
Well,
So I don't
maybe,
know.
but
But anyway, that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to those
yeah.
comics coming out.
I haven't read a Star Trek comic in a long time, so
Well, they're good. There's some good ones
sounds
out
like,
there.
yeah, it sounds like they're doing good work.
Yeah. Yep. So, and I think you have one more item.
Yeah,
for us?
well, of course, we're just about 2 months away from the premiere of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
Yes.
And speaking of trailers, I know you're not watching them, but Paramount Plus did drop a whole series of 30-second spots for Strange New Worlds this past week. Each one focused on a different character, kind of like the comics you were talking about.
Right.
There's one for number 1, or Una, as we now know her
Mhm.
name is canonically. There's one for Spock. There's one for Nurse Chapel. I won't spoil anything, but this is going to be a very different take on Nurse Chapel.
Fascinating.
There's one for Dr. Mbinga. There's one for the new characters, Hemmer and Lieutenant Ortegas and Lieutenant Lon Noonien Singh. So, and Cadet Uhura had her own spot as well. So
Yeah.
it was a nice series of commercials for the show, and it looks like it's going to be fantastic. I mean, visually fantastic, and you can already tell there's some interesting character work going on and some good performances. So
Mhm.
gets me even more excited for Strange New Worlds next month.
That's cool.
May.
Yep. Yeah. I was going to say at the top, you said about 2 months away. And I said, well, time is flying. It's almost exactly 1 month away, probably from
Yeah,
the
but it's
time
late
this
May. Like, I think, or no,
No, it's May 5th.
You're right. You are right. It's May 5th.
5th.
You are right. You are
National
right.
Day of Prayer. So
Yeah. Well, now
Continue
that's serendipitous, isn't it?
yeah, that's what I say. We're going to be praying for good Star Trek. So
I hope we'll still be. I hope we'll feel our prayers have been answered when the first episode is over, and we'll be praying even harder. Like, oh Lord, make them give us some better Star Trek.
Oh boy. Well, I think so. I'm looking forward to it as well. And of course, I will not be watching those trailers until after I've seen the first episode at least. So, but that's okay.
I totally respect it. But for those of you out there who want to see them, they're cool.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you what, I had that's a minor bone I have to pick with Paramount Plus. I pay for Paramount Plus with no commercials.
Oh,
Yet every time I sit down to watch Star Trek, they insist on showing me a trailer for Strange New Worlds first. And I always have to pull my earbuds out, look
well,
away.
see, you need to find the teaser trailer free tier, which is even more expensive
Oh,
than the
right,
commercial
yeah.
free tier.
Like, we won't even promote Paramount products to you before you start watching, right? Yeah, it's a little cheat there that they get around. But anyway, so that's all good Star Trek news, and as always, you can check the description for links to those stories. And it is time, I believe, to venture back to one of the great classic episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, The Measure of a Man. We will be doing The Measure of an Episode, which I'm sure no one has ever said about this episode before. That was my own clever invention that, of course, bears no resemblance to anyone else's punnery. So I usually ask you how you enjoy the episode when we do an episode review.
I hated it. No. I can't believe it. This doesn't feel like Star Trek.
Where's the adventure? Where are the strange new worlds?
It's so talky, Kevin.
It's so talky.
And they're wearing their heart on their sleeve. They even take off Data's sleeve entirely. No, I tell you, you used the word classic, and it is so right and spot on for this episode. I mean, without this episode, there would be no Star Trek Picard, season 1 at least. Because it introduced the character of Bruce Maddox. Yep. It introduced the ideas of Data wrestling with, or others, I should say, wrestling with what it might mean for Data to be sentient. Of course, this is the episode that got Melinda Snodgrass her spot on the TNG staff. As story editor for a good long time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really, and to be a season 2 episode, I mean, the show was always progressing and getting its legs, but this really is some of the finest TNG, and I've seen it referred to in context completely outside of Star Trek fandom. Editorials in the paper or online, whatever, will say, there was this one Star Trek episode, The Measure of a Man, and it raised this, that, and the other philosophical issue. And It's really, it totally feels like Star Trek, of course. I mean, it lives up to not only the great Trek tradition of courtroom scenes, we've got them in the original series, in Court Martial and Turnabout Intruder, which isn't a great episode, but there's a pretty good courtroom scene in it, and The Deadly Years. And then TNG would go on to do courtroom scenes in The Drumhead and some others. And even Discovery has its own version of the courtroom scene with the
Unification 3.
Unification, thank you. I forget the name of the ceremony, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So it leans into that, and of course it does raise all sorts of meaty philosophical issues, and has some great writing and some stellar performances from the cast. So I like this one a lot.
I do too. It's really great, and I love that it's such a simple episode. It's essentially
it's not a big. It isn't action packed. It isn't lots of special effects. It's
just some
straight up drama.
Yeah, just some set redressing and some new characters, and away we go.
New characters. Now that is the. I'll tell you right now, so we get it out of the way. The one beef I have with this episode, I don't feel any chemistry between Picard and Louvois. I don't know about you, but I don't feel it. I don't buy it.
Oh, okay. Well, I can understand that, but I have a different impression. I think it comes off great, but I think their history is played really well. I think Picard's clear. I don't want to say grudge, but his clear history.
He's got some reason to be.
History and hurt feelings and everything. I think
Doesn't
that
he
really
say you did more than your job? You enjoyed it.
Yes. So the history and the hurt feelings, I think, are all very much there, and I think it's I find it very credible.
Fair enough.
So.
Fair enough.
What I find less credible, of course, is the idea that Riker has to become the prosecutor.
It's a little contrived, I guess.
It is. It works really well dramatically. But it's not, it's not the way things would likely be done.
Right. It would be like Spock having to prosecute Kirk in court martial instead. There's just no logical reason for it. But I will say, Jonathan Frakes plays it so well. I love the scene where he's reviewing Data's blueprints.
Yes.
He finds the off switch, and he sits up in his chair and gets this glint in his eye because he knows, I've got it, I found it. And then immediately his face falls, and shoot, I found it.
Beautiful, yes.
Because he's been told, I think Louvois says, if I sense for a minute that you're not trying your hardest, Data's off to be taken apart by Maddox.
Right,
So he
right.
knows he's got to do the best he can, but it pains him so.
Yeah. Which that in itself is also unfair and unrealistic, but
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
dramatically for the episode, it works. It's it's my only issue with the writing, but it's such a well written episode.
It is.
Such a beautifully constructed episode. It's an episode that serves a purpose narratively for our characters, while also creating a structure that gets us to have a conversation. A particular conversation about particular ideas, which Star Trek is very good at, but sometimes we can get a little contrived and a little ham-handed getting there. And I just really applaud Melinda Snodgrass for this episode, and just say that it just goes to show that women write good Star Trek.
Oh, well, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just does.
I hope nobody doubts that anymore.
No, I know. Star Trek writers' rooms have been boys' clubs for so long, with the few exceptions, Jerry Taylor and Dorothy Fontana and Melinda Snodgrass. But now, so driven by women, and I love that. So, but it's great to see Star Trek both serve an idea and its characters at the same time. Because this, as you said, this doesn't just serve the characters for this episode. It doesn't just make not only Data, but also Picard and Will, deeper and more complex, but it also deepens their relationships to one another. And the echoes of this episode, as you said, go on throughout Star Trek. And
it really feels like this one has consequences, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just this one counts. Some stories you never think of again, and of course TV and Star Trek were still evolving at the time to where we are today with highly serialized stories that last a whole season. So but even so, and I think I know Maddox was referenced on a few more. We never saw him again in TNG, but he was referenced a few more times in TNG. Data's writing a letter to him in Data's Day.
Right.
And I think in The Offspring, even if they don't mention Maddox by name, that situation certainly echoes back to The Measure of a Man. And they think they may reference, didn't we decide Data was sentient like the rest of us or something? But
there's a whole conversation about the similarity, I think, between this episode, and I don't know if there's a conversation about the similarity that connects it back to Measure of a Man, specifically in The Offspring. I think there might be. Yeah, I think there is something about Data being
I haven't seen The Offspring in years.
But then also in the episode The Quality of Life, when Data is arguing for the potential that the exocomps, the tiny little machines, are alive, there's a whole conversation between Data and Picard at the end of that episode, where Data says, when my own status as a living being was in question, you advocated for me, and the exocomps had no such advocate. And
that's a good connection.
And by risking Picard and Geordi's lives in order to save them, by risking his own commission in order to save the exocomps, Picard says, I can understand the situation that you were in. And he says, I think it's the most human thing you've ever done. It's really interesting to see that echo of Measure of a Man come back to even further reinforce Data's burgeoning humanity, which is, of course, the central philosophical idea of this episode.
Right. Does Data have a soul?
Yes. Well, does he? What do you think?
Well, I think so. And I can't, I'm with Picard at the end that, and Louvois too. Picard says, our mission is to seek out new life. Well, there it sits. And Louvois asks, does Data have a soul? And she says, I don't know, but she can't deny that Data has a right to pursue his future himself. And, she doesn't use the word agency, but we use that word on the podcast a lot. And she says he has it, and he's got the freedom to choose and the freedom to explore. And, I don't know how well it squares with theology or philosophy, but as presented in the show, Data is clearly more than a simulation of human life. Right. He's clearly not just an automaton.
That's very important because that's the whole point. Is the idea is everything we see about Data as he presents himself to us an illusion? Or do we believe Data about himself?
Yeah.
And I think that happens to us many times in our lives when in many different ways. When people tell us who they are, we should believe them, you know?
Right.
And we hear that said a lot about people in public, maybe behaving in ways that
Yeah.
expose bad character or what have you. It's
Yeah.
interesting that we're willing to, believe people when they show us the worst of themselves. But when people show us themselves in ways that we don't like or we don't agree with or we don't approve of, how quick we might be to say, no, I'm not sure you really have what the rest of us have, which is soulishness, as I talk about. Does Data have in this theological concept, like this pre-existent eternal soul that, or are our souls pre-existent?
Well, right. That's the first
Are
question.
they, yeah, right. Or are they
Yeah.
birthed when we're conceived and all that sort of thing? What is a soul? What is soulishness? Is it a function of our brains? And if it is a function of our brains, does that make it any less amazing and any less beautiful than it actually is? And so, does Data have a soul? Well, we can at least say Data has soulishness. And as Louvois points out in the episode, in all honesty, from an objective standpoint, none of us can really say about ourselves what we have that we might call a soul and what that means about us. We certainly have concepts that we hold on to as Christians about what a soul is or how a soul functions or where it comes from. But different Christians have different understandings of that. There isn't a really clear demarcation in Scripture. There isn't anything that we can point to objectively that says, this is what a soul is, this is how it operates, this is what it does. Even when we talk about, an existence where God gets everything God wants, and all is right, that's, as far as we understand, unembodied existence. So do we have a soul apart from a body? I don't know. Does it matter? Kinda no. Because what really matters is that we have respect for the soulishness of the person we encounter. Right. And I think that's sort of the real core, the real meat of this episode in terms of how we interact with one another, is finding a soul, finding a person where we might not expect to find one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because, Maddox's approach to Data is to call him it for most of the episode.
Yes.
And to treat Data as though he's not a person with agency and freedom and all the other things that we associate with personhood. And Picard's revelation he has after talking to Guinan is, oh, you're talking about slavery,
right.
People as property. And so then the issue becomes clear. And yeah, it's important to remember that, obviously we both place a lot of stock in theological and philosophical concepts and frameworks, but when experienced reality doesn't fit, then something's got to give. And is it going to be, are you going to, and I don't mean you, Kevin C. Neese, but are you and I, or everybody listening, are we going to hang on to our frameworks at the expense of relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Are we willing to, to break off relationships because the other person doesn't fit our preconceived notions and expectations?
Right.
Well, I mean, we could make that choice, but that seems pretty sad to me.
It does.
In the Bible, as I read it, personhood is something we don't have on our own. That we are formed as people in relationships. And I think that's at least part of what it means to be in the image of God. As we've talked about before, God is only God in relationship, in God's own self. And so we are only people persons in relation to others. It's not good for the human creature to be alone.
Right.
In Genesis and all the way through, that Jesus calls together a community of friends to live loving each other as he has loved them. It's these relationships. And so I think that's what clinches the argument in terms of Data's personhood, is that everybody on the Enterprise has a relationship to him that they don't have with the computer or the tricorder or, or
Right.
the phasers, that, and that scene where Picard introduces into evidence the holographic portrait of Tasha Yar that Data has, why is this important to you? Well, she was a friend. Well, you have many friends on the ship. Why this one? We were intimate. Picard's getting at, if this android can form a relationship to people in general, and this person in particular, like that, who are we to say that because he doesn't fit our preconceived notions, he's not a person,
Right. And that's so fundamental, because it's that sort of way, right? The almost sentimentality or the sense of attachment that Picard draws attention to when he draws out, Data's medals and the book that Picard had given him, and like you said, the Tasha hologram. These are things about his connection to himself, his own accomplishments, and they are connections to other people, and they're connections to ideas, and they are reminders to him. He who does not forget anything, as we learned in the first episode. I remember every fact with which I'm presented, but he talks in this episode about how memory has an ineffable quality. The fact that he can even understand that there is more to memory, the nuance, the aroma of it, if you will, that there is more to life than just the facts of existence. That in itself shows at least deep intelligence, emotional intelligence, right? Which is very interesting for a being who doesn't really technically have emotions. So all of that shows Data as someone who is, in ways that matter most, like us, even if he is in ways that also matter, but that maybe aren't as essential as we might think, unlike us, right? So there are all these ways in which we can look at somebody else and see that they're different from us. And we can see that they're different in ways that of which we might disapprove or dislike, or which might make us uncomfortable in one way or another. But you see, you talked earlier about the way Maddox refers to Data. He always refers to Data as it. There's even a line at the end of the episode when Maddox calls him he, and Louvois says, "You didn't call him it," Just the language with which we refer to someone is fundamental to our respect for them.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
You either, and you can see this all the time in people who might say, "Oh, I'm perfectly fine with XYZ person," right? And then refer to them with language that clearly takes them a step away from personhood, a step away from real respect. Always, and it's a buffer zone there, and it's a buffer that expresses judgment, that expresses that ongoing, I'm going to display the action of respect, but I'm not going to have the essence of respect, in much the same way Data talks about the facts of life or the fact of memory, but not the essence. Not the truth, the deepest truth.
Right. And it's often, it's a buffer, as you said, but it's often hostile.
Yes.
And it's dehumanizing.
Yes.
It's why toleration as a virtue is such really a low bar to clear.
Yes.
And we need to move beyond toleration to appreciation and respect. And as we've talked about with some of the other Star Trek series that are coming out now, the value of being seen and being heard.
Yes. And that really comes to the end of the episode as well, because that buffer that we place with people and that way that we other them, a lot of that has to do with our own discomfort. And it reminds me of the conversation that closes this episode between Data and Riker, where Riker is down on himself, you know?
Yeah.
And he's, Data comes to get him. He's like, "Sir, there's a celebration on the holodeck." And Riker says, "I have no right to be there."
Right.
He says, "Because you failed in your task?" "No, God, no. I came that close to winning, Data."
Yeah.
He's saying, I came close to winning. He said, "I could have cost you your life." And he says, "If you had refused to prosecute, Captain Louvois would have ruled summarily against me, right?" And Riker says, "Yes." And he says, "That action injured you and saved me. I will not forget it." And that is what that is what love looks like. And we can do that in very small ways. When we show respect to people and we show consideration to people, especially in ways that injure us or that make us uncomfortable or that cost us something. When you say that you respect someone or say that you love someone, but you don't do the thing that costs you. You don't do the thing that injures you in order to love them with your actions, in order to respect them with your actions, then you're not really showing real respect. And people know that. You're not really showing real love, and people know that. And I just thought it's such a beautiful image there, and such wisdom on Data's part, that action injured you and saved me. And Riker says, "You're a wise man, my friend." And Data, in Data fashion, says, "Not yet, sir, but with your help, I am learning." I'm like, so self-deprecating Data is. But
so authentic. I mean, I think he means it.
He does.
I'm sure he does, because Data is not. He doesn't have the ability to be guileful.
Right.
I think the very few episodes where he is, something weird is going on. Dr. Soong's activated a hidden program, or aliens have messed with him, or Data doesn't. I mean, even more so than Spock, Data doesn't lie. Data is completely candid with people, and behold one in whom there is no guile. What else makes this episode work so well, I think, is that Maddox is not presented as some mustache twirling villain, right?
Yes.
He's only proceeding from the best of intentions, which of course we know where those can lead, but until it gets to be clear that what he's proposing is disposable people, he's got a point. Right. Think of what an army of Datas could do in the service of humanity, and so I really appreciate that. It would have been, I think, in a lesser writer's hands, this would have been, just him rubbing his hands together and cackling over the prospect of taking Data apart. But it's not that at all. It's intense admiration for what Dr. Soong has accomplished and wanting to learn from Data. And he just, I think the fact that he can come around at the end and invest Data with personhood, or not invest him, but recognize Data's personhood.
Right.
By calling Data he, using those personal pronouns.
Yes.
I think that it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like a tidy ending. It feels like a very genuine, and so how often do we have to do that too? We have to stumble our way to growing and recognizing ways in which we've, even unintentionally and even non-hostilely, dehumanized people. Right. And, find ways to do better.
Well, we talked about that. Ruth and I talked about that last episode, or not last episode, but our last topical episode. Ruth and I talked about the people in her life who had put her in such an oppressive system. Right. But in her view, and I trust her view because she knows those people better than I do.
Right.
In her view, with no malicious intent, believing that what they were doing was right. Believing that they were required by God to do what they were doing. Yeah. Which, of course, it's easy to believe that God requires things that appeal to our egos. But at the same time, that doesn't mean, like they're mustache twirling villains. And I think that happens a lot in our lives when people do things to other people or treat people in certain ways, and they don't intend it for harm. In fact, they might think they're doing what God wants them to do. They might think that they're required to do it. They might think that somehow they will have some positive, encouraging effect on this person to change whatever it is about them that makes them uncomfortable, or that they think, God doesn't want, or what have you. But in reality, they're pushing that person farther and farther away because they're disrespecting their personhood, because they're harming them. So they're placing oppressive systems on them, or whatever it is. They're doing something to harm them, whether they're right or wrong in their beliefs, whether they're right or wrong in their intentions. They still are engaging in harmful action. And it's very difficult to hear that something that you've done has been harmful to somebody else. It's very difficult to make that acknowledgement. But because again, that action injures you.
Yeah.
But when you can accept that injury to your ego, when you can accept I was wrong, in my actions, regardless of my intentions, my actions were harmful. That's a major step. That's a major step in growth and maturity and in loving your fellow human beings. Which, of course, the reason we do that, one of the reasons we do that, is that we talk about on this show all the time, is respecting and acknowledging the image of God in the other person, and not thinking of them as other, thinking of them as less than, thinking of them as somehow monstrous, or, as you said, disposable. Boy, that's a reality we run into still in our world, the concept of disposable people. There are so many people who we might say have value, but with our systems and with our actions, we treat them as disposable all the time, every day. And so, rather than viewing people that way, viewing them as valuable because they are image bearers of God. Because, as David always reminds us, they and we are the Imago Dei. And by recognizing the Imago Dei, recognizing the image of God in someone else, we also project the image of God through ourselves. We become the image of God by recognizing the image of God. Again, with that relational sense of the divine that we talk about, that you mentioned earlier in the episode. So, those are big sort of like theological cosmic ideas, but they come down to something very human and very real, which is respecting other people and treating them with kindness.
Yeah, and we just continue to see Data going in that direction as the series goes on, until at the end of Star Trek Nemesis, he sacrifices himself for his crewmates, and that's, Jesus calls that the greatest love you can have, lay down your life for your friends. So you're going to tell me that person's not a person?
Right.
Okay.
Well, and if you go back to our episode Programmed to be Human, where we talk about Data as a Christ figure, we explore that some more in that episode too. Because yes, Data's being a good human by being a good android. Just right, because he's following his programming, and he's following it so well that he begins to reflect the humanity of his creator, just like Jesus, in being a really good human, also was being really divine. That by being the best human he could possibly be, he reflects the divinity of his creator, which is imbued in his humanity, just as the humanity of Data's creator is imbued in his androidity, his androidness, right?
Right. Well, Data's programming includes the agency and freedom we've talked about.
Right.
Yeah. It's so, I think our language is so limited that I think that word programming, I get that Data's a metaphor and all that, but I don't
programming is not deterministic, right? It's rules that are followed. Right. It's parameters within which you operate.
Yeah.
And so
sets you up to do what you were meant to do.
Right. And that's exactly what's in us too. We too are programmed to be human, and therefore, in a sense, programmed to be divine, programmed to reflect the divine, not in a deterministic sense, but we're in a system, and we have desires and hungers in our hearts, and we have needs as human beings. And as we go forth for flourishing, then we will ultimately be reflecting our Creator. That's when we're at our best. And that's what's
Yeah.
and we're going to do it not all in the same way, not by all wearing the same white robes, dancing on the same white cloud, and glaring into the same blinding light and singing the same song together. But we're going to do that by each being our own unique human persons. Data chose to go into Starfleet all on his own. He chose to play the violin. He chose to combine the styles of the violinists that he mimicked. He chose to explore Sherlock Holmes. He chose to start painting and to start mimicking the different styles of painting that he mimicked. In another episode, there's I think it's 11001001. A blind man teaching an android to paint. That's got to be worth a few pages in somebody's book. So there's all that uniqueness that when Data encounters Dr. Soong is amazed by what Data's become, because even though he put those seeds in Data, he doesn't know how they were going to grow.
Right.
And so
right.
I think that's part of our communication with God too, that you can talk about God's foreknowledge, but still, I think God is invested in who we become and how we become. And
I don't see any conflict between foreknowledge and taking delight in what happens. It's kind of like you were talking about how you don't like to watch trailers because you don't want to lose the surprise element.
Right. Right.
I heard somebody saying recently on a different podcast. She stopped worrying about that because she figures if it's good enough, there's more to it than surprise, right? So she was talking about the latest Spider-Man movie. She said, I knew what was coming, but I still delighted in it because it was done so well.
Oh, yeah, that's
true.
I
think that for me is a great metaphor of how God must view our lives. That no, we're not going to surprise God,
right?
But there's no spoilers for God because it's still I hope and pray and trust a beautiful thing for God to see it unfold.
Yes.
There's no surprises, but God still takes joy in what's joyful and feels for us and suffers with us when it's not joyful.
Right.
I don't mean to say our lives are just entertainment for God, but
right. No, exactly.
All metaphors break down somewhere.
Well,
right?
it's relational though. It's relational. What you're talking about that you're delighting in is the relationship, because it's a both and proposition. It's not that God has the screws in our lives to the degree that every event that happens is exactly the way God planned it. No, we have free will. We have agency. We have freedom. We have liberty. This is our co-creative act with God. Mm-hmm. Co-creating who we are going to be as human beings, co-creating the story of our relationship to God, because that's what a relationship is. It's people bringing things to the table and adapting to one another as time goes on. And of course, God's relationship to time, we can talk about that, but still it's not that, everything that is in us is kind of like our DNA. Right? Your DNA is packed down and encoded. If like in Star Trek, we have these times where we have to save somebody. And I think there's an episode where Data gets a hair off a brush, to reconstitute somebody. We do that all the time with the transporter. We do that all the time with the transporter. We break people down into their smallest bits and then reconstitute them on the other end. And there's that sense in which if all we had of somebody was just their DNA and we destroy that DNA, we've destroyed that person. We've caused them to cease to exist as surely as if we'd shot them in the head. And so we have all of ourselves bound up in that DNA that sort of, as we say, programs us. It's our programming. It's our parameters for how we're going to exist genetically. And yet, we can't predict how that DNA is going to grow and change, and how a person is going to grow and change, because we are more than our DNA. And we can't. We're still going to be, even though all our DNAs are unique. We are still going to be unique in other ways that are so much more than our DNA. And we have these essential things about ourselves that are true and that are real, but our DNA doesn't determine every decision that we make throughout our lives. Our tendencies are there, but we choose what to do with those tendencies. That's how it is, where God's will and God's design is adaptive, and beautifully so. And just like Data's programming is adaptive. And that's part of what makes him a soulish being, a person, and not just, as Louvois says, a toaster.
Right. Right.
And just as Jean-Luc says in the episode, your objection is that Data is a machine. Well, we concede that. But again, it's irrelevant, because we too are machines, just machines of a different type.
Right. Which is something he's not just pulling out. He came up with that back in season 1 when they found Lore, and they were all sitting around the briefing room table. And so we're uncomfortable, reminded that Data's a machine. Well, we are biomechanical. I forget.
That's right.
He says much the same thing. So I give them credit for establishing that stake in the ground early on and sticking to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and he also says, you say that Data, was created. Well, again, that's irrelevant.
Right.
So were we.
Right.
We were made by, we all come from our parents. Just like Data comes from his creator. So. Yeah, it's very much, and again, it's those things that we have in common, because we all love, and we all have dreams, and we all have family, and we all have hopes, and we all have needs. All those things make us all united, all connected as human beings, and that's just in those basic ways. When we can see each other, when we can see somebody who's very different to us, someone who we might vilify as an other, when we can see them as being, while totally different or even totally exceptional, like us, we can recognize that, we're really on the same team ultimately. And that's when we start to see someone's personhood more clearly. And that's why it's so important for us to engage with people who are not like us, to hear stories of people who are not like us, to really learn who they are before we decide who they are without having really encountered them. Maddox had studied Data to no end, right?
Right.
Knew him very, very well from a schematic perspective. But through this trial, through this hearing, he begins to see Data as a person. He begins to really learn who Data is. And that's what the title of our episode refers to, Crucible of Truth, where we burn away all those impurities and all those things that hold us back from a reality that might be uncomfortable for us to accept. But if we accept it, is nonetheless freeing, is nonetheless more pure and more to be desired than whatever it is we started out with. And it's worth going through that refining fire.
I was just going to say, it's a refiner's fire.
Yes. And I think that's a tool that God uses,
Right.
That's a tool that God uses for our souls and for our spirits. We have to struggle and grow and change, and we sometimes have to go through very hard things to burn away those impurities. But that's not a punishment, it's an act of mercy. Because without that, we wouldn't become the full humans that we're meant to be.
Yeah, I think all that's very well said, Kevin. And it occurs to me watching the episode that the proceeding going on in this courtroom on this new starbase is only called a hearing, but it really is a trial.
Yeah.
As I said, Star Trek does great with the trial scenes, and it's not just Data and the status of his soul that's on trial here. Maddox is kind of on trial. What's he really going to do with this army of Datas he wants to make? Louvois is on trial. She said at the top of the episode her goal is to make good law, and Picard reminds her of that in his closing argument. You said you wanted to make law. Well, here's your chance. Make it a good one.
Right.
And humanity is on trial because Picard says eventually somebody, Maddox or someone else, will replicate Data. And what we decide here today in this crucible will determine how we treat those people. And so, the ethics of Starfleet, those high-minded ideals we mention a lot on this show, they're on trial. Are our ideals strong enough to accommodate the new and the unexpected. As you said, finding people where we didn't expect to find them, finding life where we didn't expect to find it, finding sentience where we didn't expect it. All those things are on trial, and it's so beautifully focused into this one moment on this space station, but there's all these different trials going on.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a trial, and we think of a trial too in that legal sense of being questioned and being pushed and all that sort of stuff. But we experience trials in our lives all the time, things that try us, things that test
Yeah,
us.
sure.
Not we think, oh, God is testing me, because God is trying me. God is putting me on trial because God wants to see if I will succeed or fail, so that it can be known whether God should reward me or punish me. But that's not the way testing and trials go at all. That's not what they're meant to do. I mean, you think Data's fate is the subject of this hearing, is the subject of this trial, as you say, but all these people are going through a trial of their own. Jean-Luc is going through a trial.
Right. Right.
Will is going through a trial.
Certainly.
Because they have to confront how they're going to behave. As Jean-Luc is making these arguments for Data's personhood, he is himself discovering them. He's learning what he himself believes about Data.
Yes.
If all of his high-minded ideals, if all the words that he's put to Data really have substance, boy, that's so often what we do when we say we believe something, but we've got to learn that belief. If we're really going to hold it, we've got to test and try that belief. Testing and trying our own faith is sometimes is not just about, whether we're, a good person or not. It's about, testing and approving what the Lord's will is, testing and approving, finding out for sure, clearing away the impurities. And it can be very difficult to clear away those impurities, to burn that away. It can be, and it can be
sometimes intense. We'd rather not.
Many times we'd rather not. We are comfort creatures. Right? We would very much like for things to stay the way they are. And maybe that comfort, I'm stretching a little bit here, but maybe that comfort has something to do, that longing for just being comfortable and being left alone and not needing to change, that sort of lethargy of the soul, maybe that has something to do with what's not right in our hearts. Right? And maybe that ability to adapt and change has something to do with what is right in our hearts and what God can help create in our hearts that is more like God. I think God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but God is nothing if not adaptable. God created...
Well, right. God is not static. God is I am that I am. You know, the Hebrew name for God is a form of the verb to be. So
it's ongoing and perpetual, and God created a universe that is a system that functions and always persists, and yet constantly adapts. And so I think that's a beautiful picture of the mind of God, if you will, or the will of God. And
and I should add that many scholars think that name of God is better translated future tense. I will be what I will be. So which only underscores the point.
And it's a future tense thing, not that God is becoming God.
Right. But it's not process theology or something like that.
But that God's being is now and will be, right? There's that by putting it future tense, it's not saying, well, I will be me someday.
Right. No,
it's I am what will continue to perpetuate from here on out.
And I will be whoever I need to be in relationship.
Right.
This is all in the context of God hearing the cry of God's people and saying, because I have heard their cry, therefore I have come down to save them.
Right.
And so, that's why we talked earlier about things not fitting our preconceived notions.
Right.
And when I get sometimes too tied up in theological thoughts, I remember the only reason the early Christians felt compelled to confess Jesus is Lord is because those first believers interacting with this human being, this guy from Galilee, and seeing his life and his death and resurrection could only conclude, I don't understand it, I don't know how, but I meet the God of Israel in a unique way in this person.
Yeah.
And so all our theologies stem from experience. All the church's attempts to wrestle with the Trinity and all the rest of it stem from the experience, the experiential encounter and relationship with God in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. And that helps me a lot to remember that that's what's important. That's the heart of faith. It's as we've talked about, it's relational. It's being in a relationship with a God who is personal. It's I will be who I will be to be in relationship with you and
Right.
people.
Right. Not in a sense of changing who God is essentially, right?
Right.
But in the sense of changing, of making the adaptations that need to be made, whether it's, embodying God's self as a human being and going through suffering and death and all those sorts of things and overcoming death, or whatever it may be, creating a sacrificial system, all that sort of thing. Moving along with humanity in relationship, and yet being our constant at the same time.
Yeah.
Like I talked about a few episodes ago, a character who is in balance is a character who is in motion, who is constantly adapting. That's how you maintain balance.
Right.
And we have to maintain balance. And I think you're very right to center our whole theology in relationship. That's really very much the point. And that the revelation of Jesus is a relational revelation. And that's what happens in this episode. It is relational revelation. I think, even as you look at Picard's relationship with Louvois, like they have ideas about each other and thoughts about each other and feelings about each other that have built up over years. But when they start interacting together, then they can see the reality of one another and work on those things and end up, hanging out together at the end of the episode. I mean, obviously they didn't get married or anything, but they made some peace. And it's the same thing with Data and Riker. Riker had to be in a very uncomfortable position in this episode and do something he didn't want to do, but in his relational connection with Data, he learns something. He learns something about Data. He learns something about humanity. He learns something about himself. He learns to forgive himself. And he learns a little bit more about what love is, and that sometimes it's hard to do. And Maddox does the same thing as we talked about earlier. As he gets in a relationship with Data, he is changed as well. And so that's so much what's going on in this episode. Is this trial is forcing everybody into this crucible of truth, where they are going through the process of learning what the truth is in relationship with one another. And that's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably the only way to really find truth is in relationship with each other.
Yeah. It's not, you can't do it all by yourself in an ivory tower or whatever. I mean, that has its place, but ultimately even that, the ideas we think up on our own have to be lived out, tested to see if they're valuable, if they help us flourish, as you would say.
Right. And even at that, we still lean on the ideas of the people who've come before us.
That too.
Yeah. So we're in a long distance relationship with a lot of people elsewhere in time. If we'll allow ourselves, like Picard says to Wesley in Samaritan Snare, he's saying, anyone can be trained in the mechanics of piloting a starship, but look to the past, right? History and art and philosophy, and Wesley says, but William James won't be on my Starfleet exams. and Jean-Luc says, important things never will be, and that idea again of that there are greater truths and that there is a whole wealth, that cloud of witnesses that the scriptures talk about. There's the whole wealth of the knowledge and the wisdom of the people who've gone before us, who we can often lose. But if we connect with that, boy, that can help us too. And if we look at the scriptures too in that way too, as a connection to our ancestors in faith, right? That they hadn't got it all figured out yet, but they were figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moral arc to the universe, and it bends toward justice. And as they are working toward that in the narrative of Scripture, we can then build on what they've laid down for us from their experience as well, and find again in that crucible of truth, of experience, where the good, the truth, the beautiful really lie, and pursue those things in our lives, especially in one another.
Right.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion yet again. I think we could probably go on for another couple of hours, and the idea is that's why this is one of the great Star Trek episodes, because, even though it's this bottle
really
episode and it's just, a few characters having mostly just talking to one another, it makes for a really wonderful story that's about so much more than what it's just about. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, thanks for joining us on that journey, folks. And thank you also for writing into the show and telling us your thoughts and your ideas, your questions, your comments. And when you do that, we put it in a little section we like to call audience feedback.
We like to call it that, do we? What a clever name we have given that segment.
Aren't we clever?
We need to come up with like a mailbag name, something, not mailbag, but something like, we need to come up with a good segment.
Yeah. Subspace signals or something. Anyway.
Subspace chatter. I think the comics used that for a while.
Yeah.
The letters page of the Christopher Pike comic that Marvel put out was, I believe, called Subspace Chatter.
Oh, fascinating.
So if people have a good idea for a feedback segment name, send that in as feedback too.
See, that's right. We'll get to our feedback right now. This one comes from a listener who wrote an email. Of course, folks, you send me these emails. They are so good. There's always so much in them. And me, I can take a small thing and say a lot about it. So some people write in with so many ideas in one episode and in one email. And I apologize. It takes me a long time to get back to you on these things and reply, but I do try to reply to everybody who writes in as much as I possibly can, because you just bring me so much good stuff. And then, of course, we also reply through this section. But this listener says that Star Trek 4 is one of their favorite movies of all time. We've talked about Star Trek 4 several times recently on the show. And that's why they're saying this, because Star Trek has been connecting back to Star Trek 4 and Picard. And they say it challenges us to be better without being so dark. And talking about some of the things that we're going through in Picard being so painful. Seeing these things that we've gone through. We talked in earlier episodes about how Next Generation tells us that things are going to get worse before they get better, right? There's a World War III before there's a 24th century. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about how it's nice to be challenged to be better without being so dark. I think that might be true of this episode we discussed this week too.
Yeah, I think so. I don't consider Measure of a Man a dark episode. So is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's I think it brings us right up to the edge where we could see how this could go in a dark direction.
Right.
But fortunately, Picard and the Judge Advocate General's office put a stop to that before it can happen.
Right.
But yes, I would agree. And Star Trek 4 is so much fun. It's sometimes easy to forget the serious issues at play. I think the one scene, I think maybe we talked about this. We just did a Star Trek 4 anniversary last year. Is that right? I think.
Yeah,
that sounds right to me. Yeah. We talked about. I think
we've done 75 episodes, folks. Our memories are getting foggy.
But I think you brought up how the most violent scene in that film is the whalers.
Right.
Gutting open the whales they've harpooned, and that's real life footage. That wasn't created for the movie. So there is some darkness there, but it's certainly minimal, and it's used very effectively when it is used. And the listener is absolutely right that that movie calls us to be better and do better without preaching a Jeremiah at us or showing us a dystopian future that, we'll all go to hell in a handbasket if we don't. So, yeah.
And I think that's very important too, because that's something I think Christian preaching uses a lot you know. I think we use it too much, especially, or have used it too much, especially like, you know, you hear of like youth camp where they tell the stories of, you know, oh yeah, these two kids did this sinful thing and then they both got
Ha!
beheaded, you know, whatever, you know, it's like some terrible thing befell them. And it's campfire ghost stories meant to instill virtue in children. And it's just a terrible way to go about it. And I don't think that's at all what Star Trek is doing right now in going through some of these rougher places, some of these darker places. But we can, I think, have that idea that we're going to show you this dark, bad, awful thing that could come in your future, and that will like kind of scare you straight, sort of thing. We do have that idea, and I don't think Star Trek does that. I think Star Trek more tells the kind of stories that admit to the darkness we know is in our hearts, so that the positivity doesn't feel phony. And I think particularly in a time when so much of us have gone through so many things that are difficult, yes, there's an element to which we kind of just want some escapism that also, you know, will help us be better, as you might say Star Trek 4 could be called, even as it confronts our inhumanity to whales, and then ultimately to ourselves. You know, there is a place for telling stories that go to dark places, and not in that, you know, campfire ghost story kind of way, but in a very real and a very honest way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not the only way to do it either. And I think it takes both kinds of stories. Well, it takes a lot of kinds of stories. I've probably quoted him on the show before, but a musician I like quite a bit is called Billy Crockett. Go look him up. He's great. He's from Texas. And he said in an interview years and years ago, and I know because I quoted him. He said, "Truth in art can be shown in one of two ways: either by showing something that is genuinely hopeful, or by showing something that is bleak, that has a hole the shape of what's clearly missing." And I think that's often what is done in art at its best, is that something that's bleak has a hole that is the shape of what's clearly missing. And it's one of the reasons it's important for us to tell stories and make art that covers those darker regions, right? Those more difficult regions of our life experience, because it is part of the truth of our existence. But yeah, you know, it's like the show, the early showrunner, I've forgotten his name because we've gone through so many showrunners since then. The early showrunner for Star Trek Discovery said early on in the first season, he said, you know, because things were bleak. And he's saying, we can't go on like this forever. This is Star Trek.
Right. All right. That's you can't have a steady diet of any kind of story. I mean, Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett made the decision to take Star Trek 4 in a lighter direction because the previous two movies had been so dark, you know, not in the sense
heavy.
In the sense of heavy and high drama, high stakes. And certainly the stakes are high in Star Trek 4, but it's a story with a much lighter touch.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be, you know, not just this listener's favorite, but so many, and many who aren't Star Trek fans as well. It's one of the few Star Trek movies they've seen. Oh yeah, that's the one with the whales.
So there's something to be said for telling truths in a winsome way.
That's right.
And I like that very much. And I think you're right on for saying that. And while I do certainly appreciate the dark places to which Star Trek goes, I do agree with you that it's nice to have a respite from that as often as possible. And Star Trek 4 is a great one. So, well, anyway, thanks for your feedback. Thanks for sending that in. We really appreciate it, and we hope to hear from you and others again as we go forward.
Absolutely.
Well, Mike, what have we got coming up next week?
Well, we'll be talking about the next episode of Star Trek Picard, Season 2, Episode 6. I don't believe the title has been announced yet, but I can hardly believe we're halfway through the season already. I
know. Well, you know, when seasons are only 10 episodes long, here you go.
I know, but it feels like, you know, now that we know, well, I won't say anymore. For those who may not have seen Picard. Now that we know what we know. But we're at the halfway point, and we're just now learning some key things. And so we shall see. We shall see.
All right. Well, I am looking forward to that conversation, and I hope all of you are as well, and will join us for that episode. if you're listening to those episodes, or at least for our next topical episode. And in the meantime, please like, comment, and share. And if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about our show and let us know how we're doing.
And send us your feedback and questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We really would love to talk about your feedback on the show.
And you can support the show by subscribing. You'll get early access to each week's topical episode, plus outtakes and bonus content. Just click on the subscribe button wherever you listen. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here, and until next time.
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin C. Neese, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.